Good morning, everybody. Today is Thursday, October 19th, 2023, last time I checked. And this is a joint meeting of the Education and Culture and Health and Human Services Committee. I'm Chair of Education and Culture, Will Jawando, and I have my wonderful chair, Chair Albornoz, and Councilmember Lukey, and Councilmember Sales, and Councilmember Mink will be here shortly. We have two items on the agenda today, very exciting items that we're really looking forward to hearing about the plan and the progress. One, the strategic plan to end childhood hunger, and I want to give a big shout out to Councilmember Albornoz, my co-chair, for leading this effort, and it's something that he and I care about a lot, and all of us care about a lot, but he really has taken the bull by the horns, and that's not a statement about any type of food. We like anyone, you know, but and has really plowed forward with this to keep the analogy going. We know that this is a big issue. And the second issue we're going to talk about, which is related, is MCPS's school meals program and the efforts to expand access to food. And I appreciate all our MCPS folks from being here. I'll turn to Councilmember Albornoz momentarily, but this is a huge issue. We know, as we'll hear and we'll look in the presentation, even prior to the pandemic, access to food for everybody, but particularly for our children, has been an issue. We have more than 30,000 children who are food insecure in our county, and many are in households that are below the poverty level. And this is a important thing. The research is really clear that food insecurity impacts development, relates to educational and health and challenges, and it requires a coordinated strategic plan to end it, and that's what we're really excited to talk about here first. So I'll turn it over to my co-chair. I'll just say one thing. Earlier this week, I visited Albert Einstein as part of my visits to all of our schools clusters, and members of the student government shared their desire. One of the things, I just opened book. I didn't ask them any. I don't ask them what to say. I don't steer them in any direction. I said, "What are the top things you're facing?" And they said, "We want to expand school meals again for more students, and we see that it's an issue." And I dug a little deeper, and a couple of them said they would get it, but the cost is prohibitive. And and I'll say, for I have MCPS students. I know several of us up here do. I get a lot of reminders to re-up my meals account. It goes very quickly. And I think about that, and we'll get to that portion of the discussion. But every time I do, I'm paying a service charge too. That's not insignificant, and so it's something that, as part of this whole pie, we're going to have to figure out. So again, thank you to Councilmember Albornoz. I'll turn to him, and then we'll turn to staff.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. And I once again want to acknowledge publicly the tremendous leadership that Chair Jawando showed, particularly during COVID, in standing up one of the first food distribution centers in partnership with his place of worship and the county. And that and many other examples served as the impetus for the aha moment that I and many of us had, that the incredible infrastructure and system-wide strategy of addressing food insecurity during COVID is something that we needed to amplify, sustain, and expand upon post-COVID. And that's what this plan is all about. I give a tremendous amount of credit to Ms. Bruskin and the incredible steering committee made up of extraordinary leaders, both public, private, and nonprofit, that exhaustively over a series of months engaged stakeholders, sought feedback, looked at best practices, both internally and externally, talked to policymakers. And so the journey that took us to this plan, which on its own is extraordinary and has already been recognized both regionally and nationally as a model that we need to stand up across this country, that journey has been wonderful in helping to fortify the trust and the relationships and the communication that happened during COVID. Because we were fortunate to already have this strong infrastructure of organizations in place. But with all of the new players entering into this space, we wanted to ensure that it lived beyond that particular time in our history. And so I know all of my colleagues and I are deeply committed to this work. And while the county executive and I don't agree on some things, this is certainly one of the things we agree very much on. And I do give a lot of credit to him, but particularly his team, for continuing to make this a priority within his administration, as evidenced by not just this plan, but I know some preliminary conversations about the need for additional resources to be able to begin to enact this plan, but also to continue to address the need that we all know, we hear from our constituents all the time, is still very real. And food insecurity there is no stronger foundational issue. I mean, housing is huge, and that needs to be a priority as well. But this is something that crosses the entire county, all geographic regions, and it's something that we have to continue to make a priority. So thank you all very much. We look forward to digging into the recommendations today. And with that, I will yield to Ms. Clemens-Johnson to walk us through the packet and sort of tee this up. And then Ms. Breskin will ask you to introduce yourself and all of the members of this esteemed panel as well.
Thank you. Sheriff DeWano and Albernos. So just to walk you through the packet briefly, we are talking today about implementation of the strategic plan. So we launched the strategic plan on September 6th. It was available to the public, and there are 14 strategies that are outlined within the plan. So we went to the OFSR and Food Council and said, where do we start? So within this packet, they have outlined an implementation plan timeline to move forward within the next two fiscal years. We requested of timeline and how we start to implement some of these strategies that are outlined in the report. So from that, the strategies that they've outlined really expand on the good works that are already in place within the county and how we expand those to support children and families. So some of them highlight new grant programs or the expansion of programs, and we also have our partners here with MCPS. As we know, a lot of this focus work will take place or need the coordination with the schools. So I will stop there and yield to Essie.
And I'll just say, so we're going to go through both the presentations, and then colleagues, then we'll do questions for everybody.
So thank you. As you mentioned, both chairs mentioned, the second part of this conversation is very closely related to the first part of this conversation, related to the work that has been ongoing for many years with MCPS staff as well as with the Food Council and other advocates around increasing access to school meals for families. As we all know, in addition to the federal free and reduced meals program, there of course are families who may not be eligible for that program but still do experience food insecurity, and the efforts to continue to be able to increase access to those families and others to food has been a subject of a great deal of work in the agency and in the community for a long time. The good news is that some of the rules at the federal and state level are shifting in ways that open some possibilities. The concurrent news is that estimating the costs of how to implement these options is complex. The fiscal structure of food, of school meals and school-provided meals is very complex. And so as we examine and analyze these possibilities, which again we're very happy to have, we do want to be deliberate and intentional about understanding the implications of those options, fiscally as well as on the operations of the school system, and how we can really move through those in a way that maximizes food security and food availability, as well as being, again, judicious with resources. So that is, I think, again, I'm sorry, I want to add one other thing, which is that along the way and throughout this shifting landscape, MCPS, and again with working closely with advocates, does have a number of strategies already in place. There are schools that are experiencing the free universal meals experience, and that's been really important. And again, looking for ways to build on those efforts, and certainly just wanted to take a minute to, even in all the complexity, acknowledge that, again, there has been movement in this area. There has been a great deal of progress over time, and we certainly just want to build on that and make it as broadly accessible as possible.
So
Good morning. I am incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to be here with my colleagues and with you all this morning. Thank you to our committee chairs and esteemed council members for the chance to share strategies and opportunities to end childhood hunger in our county. For the record, I'm Heather Ruskin. I'm the director of the county's Office of Food Systems Resilience. I'm joined by a variety of colleagues who will introduce themselves throughout the presentation, and also Amy Beal, who's the Community Schools Coordinator at MCPS. I know we've had the chance earlier this month to share an overview of this plan with the HHS Committee, but for the purposes for framing our conversation today, wanted to share a bit of recap on both the strategies as well as the data behind the initiatives. So this childhood hunger plan was resulting from County Council action in May of 2022 under the leadership of then Council President Albornoz, and it funded a contract between the DHHS and the county government and the Food Council to create this government strategy. And so it was formally launched a few months ago, and now we have an opportunity in front of us to act upon the recommendations for the betterment of our entire because that information is really based on a lot of national level data that's correlated to food or correlated to our specific population. And so what we really need to do is take into consideration the high cost of living here and the self-sufficiency standard that's calculated for our families every year. And what we find is while most of the federal benefits are only eligible to families of certain citizenship status and who make below about 135 to 185% of the federal poverty level, for these families to cover all of their basic costs of living, it's really about the 400% of the federal poverty level that they need to have an income to make ends meet. And so we need to uniquely in Montgomery County look at how we can support the families that live in that gap, of which there are tens of thousands of children who currently are not getting assistance from the federal government for the most part to support their needs. Next slide, please. It's also important to look at this information geographically. When we look at eligibility in 130 to 400% of the poverty level, you'll see that it's concentrated along the 270 corridor and the border with Prince George's County. But when we look specifically at those families that live between 185% and 400% of the federal poverty level, we recognize, and this is something we already knew, but it's important to have data to understand it, that covers our entire county. And the food insecurity for children exists in every community countywide. We also need to look at the unique characteristics of our incredibly diverse community population and look at the intersections of racial inequity, social injustice, and language barriers to food access, and keep all of these unique components in mind as we craft our strategy. It's also critically important that we listen directly to our residents and food assistance provider partners and other community organizations that are engaged in this work and experiencing these barriers on a daily basis. And so the Food Council was a critical partner in ensuring that this plan is rooted in the lived experience of both service and hunger.
Good morning, I'm Anne Marie Hart Bookbinder with the Montgomery County Food Council. The Food Council, which played a similar role in the creation of the county's food security plan in 2017, built on its expertise as a convener around food systems issues and food security issues in particular to shepherd the development of this plan. This process was guided by our advisory group, which was co-chaired by Councilmember Albornoz and Dr. Christopher Rogers of DHHS. Subject matter experts. Participants in these meetings included food assistance providers, other community programs serving children and families at risk of experiencing food insecurity, and local policy and advocacy groups. Next slide, please. The voices of residents experiencing food insecurity and accessing programs and resources in the county are critical to informing this process. The Food Council utilized both quantitative and qualitative methods to obtain resident feedback, working with Community Science, a county-based evaluation firm, to create a survey instrument and listening session protocols. The Montgomery County Childhood Hunger Survey was conducted electronically in English and Spanish and received more than 1,300 responses, 84% in English and 16% in Spanish. 4 listening sessions with a total of 40 participants were hosted by community partners Identity Inc., Manna Food Center, and the Up County Hub, with 3 sessions held in Spanish and 1 in English. County, as noted previously, with many children living above the federal poverty level but below the self-sufficiency standard. The difficulties in navigating the application process for various nutrition benefit programs, not knowing where or how to ask for help, and lack of access to transportation. These findings were consistent with feedback received from providers and subject matter experts during stakeholder meetings, and the recommendations proposed in the plan seek to address these barriers.
So how does all this inform the that are operated by local governments? And so that means that next slide, please. Our recommendations need to be as value added as possible. And while making sure that we are serving as many residents in the moment with access to food, those investments also need to work towards the future that we envision, where we're investing also in educational opportunity, economic opportunity, addressing racial injustice, as well as addressing climate change and the sustainability goals that we've set for our county. Similarly, while we're looking at how we can invest these resources strategically, we also need to make sure that we're evaluating using intentional performance goals the impact of these programs on both immediate service as well as our long-term outcomes for our community. And so data collection and analysis is intentionally built into all of these recommendations. So we need to make sure not just that we're making thoughtful investments, but also that the services are having the desired impacts on the residents that we're seeking to support. Similarly, we also need to make sure that we're leveraging federal resources wherever possible through participation in benefits program or the not insignificant amount of funds that's coming from the federal government towards food issues. We need to strengthen the capacity of our nonprofit sector. They have been stretched as thin as they could be and have achieved heroic things during our pandemic response. But to continue to rely on them for implementing strategies, we need to make sure that we're investing not just in the supplies for their distribution, but also in their capacity as organizations, as employers, and as partners in everything from data collection to strategic planning. We also function in a capitalist world, and we need to more effectively leverage the unique market drivers that dictate the costs of food and the opportunities to source food at competitive pricing, and aligning our food security efforts with broader efforts to support our farms and our food and beverage producers in the county by leveraging aggregation and procurement priorities in this work. And then finally, using our relatively new county grants mechanisms to more effectively build transparency and inclusivity, and engaging the expertise of community partners in how we administer these variety of investments. And so the recommendations in the plan are grouped into 3 major categories, the first being direct assistance to our residents, which shifts us towards our goals of food sovereignty so that residents are truly driving the decisions that they make in terms of what food they're accessing, where they're accessing it, if it's in the garden or a restaurant or a grocery store. Also that these strategies are taking place where residents already are accessing other services, whether it's schools or healthcare sites. And then finally, how can we look at examples from other places, models that have been successful in other jurisdictions that we can bring here, and investigate how they could support Montgomery County residents as well. Next slide, please. We also, next please, are not operating in a bubble. And so there are shifts in the federal landscape, in the state landscape, and even in the county space related to funding and policies. And so we need to have an adaptable and strategy that can evolve over time as we implement these priorities. So first, our office has been created recognizing that the county sees food as a unique lens, not just for supporting our residents, but also crafting the community that we envision for the future, and centering data collection, innovative thinking, and strategy in all of the investments and policymaking related to food. I think it's also important to re-emphasize the impact of the end of emergency allotments. The federal government in February ended a few months early the expansion of SNAP benefits to residents as part of a pandemic-era program, and that had an impact of over $7 million a month just here in Montgomery County. And that really underscores how we cannot close those gaps on our own, and we need to be as strategic and resourceful as we can be in this work. And it also really underscores how massive this gap is for so many of our families and the impact that that has on our local economy, which shouldn't be overlooked. In the good news side, the Blueprint initiative at the state level is expanding investment in the development of community schools, which creates more intentional partnership opportunities with individual schools for service distribution, and the expansion of school meals opportunities. And I know our colleagues from MCPS will share that in detail later this morning. So we have not focused on meal-based recommendations, recognizing that that's a component of another presentation this morning.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Nardi. I'm a program manager in the Office of Food Systems Resilience. So our team in the OFSR collaborated with the Food Council to develop and share a food assistance provider survey that was sent out to more than 100 organizations supporting food security in the community. The survey was initially shared in mid-September and remained open for 1 month. We offered the option for organizations to complete the survey in an Excel format, print format, or through the online survey platform to support accessibility. We received a total of 81 responses, almost 70% of which represent organizations that have been working in the community for more than 10 years, demonstrating the long-standing and deep relationships that these organizations have within the communities that they serve. 14 organizations, or 17%, reported that they provided food assistance to more than 10,000 children in the past year, and 4 of those organizations reported serving more than 100,000 children in the past year. 16 organizations reported through the survey that they served food assistance in some format for at least one Montgomery County public school site.
To complement OFSR's survey, the Food Council recently hosted food assistance provider listening sessions, and I'll highlight here 2 key points specifically connected to children. One provider shared that partnering with local schools increased their confidence that they were serving families with the greatest need, as they knew the children qualified for free school meals, and it helped them in obtaining household data that can be a challenge for providers to collect because of the trust the school staff had established with the family. Also, reaffirming what we heard from both organizations and residents during the creation of the plan, attending food distributions with young children, particularly when relying on public transportation, is a major barrier to accessing these resources.
Good morning. My name is Allison Schnitzer, and I'm with the Montgomery County Food Council. So our first strategy focuses on maximizing federal dollars to support the food security of our residents. SNAP is our nation's first line of defense against hunger, and it's the best way to link food insecure families with reliable funding to buy healthy foods. SNAP enrollment also automatically qualifies children for free meals at school or daycare and has a positive local economic impact because each dollar in federally funded SNAP benefits generates as much as $1.79 in local economic activity. Ensuring that all children eligible for SNAP receive their full benefits will invest more funds in our local economy, build choice and dignity in food access, and free up local dollars for other strategies. But enrolling in SNAP is a complicated, multi-step process that keeps many eligible families from getting enrolled. Families need to both gain SNAP benefits and retain them through recertification cycles that happen every 6 months. A variety of barriers, from language spoken to lack of access to technology, as well as fear and misinformation about SNAP, prevent families from enrolling. These families need one-on-one assistance from trusted sources to overcome these barriers. The first recommendation on this slide utilizes the existing structure of the MCPS community schools and their parent community coordinators to provide direct assistance to MCPS families with enrolling in federal benefit programs. PCCs at community schools can function as navigators and complete SNAP applications for families. They can also complete referrals to WIC and also assist families with applications for other benefit programs they might qualify for, such as Medicaid or energy assistance. This recommendation is modeled on the DHHS navigation program, which could be funded to provide training, technical assistance, and overflow support to the parent community coordinators. Recognizing the need for enrollment support for non-school age children, the second recommendation on this slide is a grant program to support SNAP outreach and enrollment by community-based organizations targeted specifically to children ages 0 to 5. This recommendation can also bring in additional federal funds to Montgomery County if the organization awarded with the grant is already in partnership with the State of Maryland's SNAP Outreach Program. The state reimburses 50% of SNAP outreach and enrollment expenses to their partner organizations if matching funds are provided.
As mentioned earlier today, a wide range of factors, including documentation status and income inequity, leave many county families either ineligible to participate in federal nutrition programs like SNAP and free and reduced price meals, or only receiving a minimum amount of benefits, which does not meet their needs and perpetuates food insecurity. We know that there are thousands of children and households that fall into the self-sufficiency gap in Montgomery County and cannot access these federal and state resources that help to address food insecurity. Building on the model of the Montgomery County Care for Kids program, which provides access to health care services for uninsured children in Montgomery County, we're recommending the creation of a retail food access program, starting as a small-scale pilot that would provide thousands of children and families in our county who are living in financially insecure households with critical food access support. To implement this initiative, we plan to work with the Department of Health and Human Services to identify families that are experiencing food insecurity due to federal or state benefits ineligibility or inadequacy, and offer these families the opportunity to receive a nutrition benefit through this program. Participants would receive a monthly nutrition benefit, ideally to be used in a similar fashion as a SNAP EBT card, to make food purchases through an online food retail platform that offers home delivery to mitigate transportation barriers. We're suggesting that the pilot period run from February to June of 2024, and for those 5 months, each participating family would receive an allocation of funds to spend on food through the selected online platform. The online platforms that we've explored already for the purposes of this initiative each offer a data collection component. This will enable monitoring of benefits usage on a monthly basis for each participating household, which would inform future iterations of the program, especially in terms of benefit sufficiency. Additionally, the OFSR and DHHS plan to develop a pre- and post-intervention survey or screening that would be administered to all participating households to measure the impact of this program in addressing food security levels, purchasing and eating habits, and transportation and time barriers relevant to food access.
Another strategy to address hunger that has garnered a lot of attention in recent years, particularly through the White House's focus on the strategies to end hunger in our country, are food as medicine as a key opportunity to address diet-related disease and reach families where they're already accessing other services. So pursuing a food as medicine program, which already exists in small-scale ways at specific healthcare sites, but expanding it more intentionally to reach households with children, would allow county healthcare providers to establish new programs that are tailored to the unique populations that they serve, their capacity, whether it is providing home-delivered produce, markets on site, or distribution at the actual healthcare sites, will enable them to support children and families who've been screened and identified as being food insecure with access to nutritious food in a consistent way. It will also allow us to track the impacts of increased access to produce on diet-related disease outcomes for these families, which has historically been shown as a direct impact of funding programs like this. The program is recommended to have a kind of unique component in providing 100% match to Care for Kids clinics or Montgomery Cares partner clinics to recognize that they already have significant costs in supporting families, while also providing a 40 to 60% match to private healthcare sites who are also interested in providing programs like this, with a potential opportunity to provide an increased match for programs that center supporting small farms or farms that are owned and operated by historically disadvantaged Black and brown farmers and women-owned farms for their sourcing for their products. And there also would be requirements around nutrition education and evaluation as a component of these programs. And there's a possibility in FY24 of supporting 1,000 families per week with access to fresh produce. So this both aligns our values with our investments and will reduce costs over time for our community in improving the overall health outcomes of our children.
There are numerous food assistance providers and county service hubs already supporting school-based food distributions and pantries, but many of them are at capacity despite ongoing and continuous requests for support from MCPS schools that do not have existing or adequate food assistance programs. Following discussions with our MCPS partners here today, we developed a concept for a grant program that would match food assistance providers with schools based on factors such as geographic proximity, capacity, and ability to meet the school's unique needs. We plan to work with MCPS to identify support needs from schools that do not currently have any on-site food access programs or do not have sufficient school-based food resources. The Food Council has been collecting and maintaining detailed data around school-based food supports, which offer insights into the existing landscape of food assistance relationships within each MCPS cluster. We anticipate that the food assistance provider community, with additional funding for staffing, coordination, and food resources, could serve approximately 20 additional schools using approaches like weekend bags and pre-packed produce boxes, and another 20 schools with the school-based food pantry or market model. This would particularly be helpful in middle and high schools where distribution of pre-packed bags has historically been less effective. Pantries and markets can support roughly 100 families per week with access to both shelf-stable items and fresh fruit, vegetables, dairy, and proteins, which is another opportunity to potentially engage with the local food sector for fresh produce, eggs, and meat. For this program, success looks like more nutritious and culturally appropriate food being distributed to more households with school-aged children, with schools and trusted school staff as the conduit. Our partnership with MCPS will allow for successful administration and coordination of this program, as well as the collection of metrics to inform future and ongoing school-based supports.
And as we know, a component of food security is not just the physical need to access food, but there's also key emotional wellness components to it as well. And what we hear so often from our residents, particularly those who grew up in communities with food production and farming access as a key component of life. That's a particular challenge here in Montgomery County where access to land is often so limited. So we, in the FY23 Resident and Community Gardening Grants Program, were able to leverage additional $50,000 from our county's DEP in a one-time match to support 10 organizations for expansion of resident and community gardening opportunity. So not just growing nutritious food that's culturally diverse right here in the county, but also granting access to working in the soil and educational opportunity for children in the broader community. But those one-time funds mean that in FY24, we currently only have $50,000 in the OFSR budget for this program, which will significantly limit our ability to either provide renewed funding to the programs which have recently been launched or support for the first time new initiatives that are expanding in our county and providing a key component of that path towards food sovereignty.
Good morning. My name is Juan Cruz. I am the Performance Management and Data Analyst with the Office of Food Systems Resilience. And I want to talk to you about our data-informed programming. So in the OFSR, we wanted to support all these strategies with the evaluation framework that really addressed and balanced the two things, which is the immediate services and understanding and centering those performance metrics, as well as the long-term impact of those initiatives and ultimately the end of childhood hunger. And so what we developed here is a framework in which we want to provide support to the food systems assistance providers so that they can increase their capacity for data analysis and reporting, so that they can better track their efforts and the metrics that we're asking them to do. And so there is funding included in these strategies for that particular purpose. So from that, we will move on to build service metrics to really get at the intended goals of the initiatives. From there, we want to really be able to track the progress towards these outcomes. So we want to make sure that there is the progression towards these outcomes are being reported as well. And then finally, that these outcomes ultimately center in equity and justice and moving that forward, so that these performance metrics are not just part of the strategy alone, but that they're also addressing the root causes of childhood hunger as well.
Advocacy efforts should focus on maximizing federal and state programs to support the food security of Montgomery County residents. Montgomery County should continue to advocate for increasing SNAP benefit amounts, expanding eligibility, and improving administrative processes to make the application easier for residents to complete. This summer will be the first year of a federal summer SNAP program, which will provide $120 per eligible child for the summer, but states need to opt into the program and they need to cover 50% of the administrative costs of the program. We also want to support the continuation of Maryland's summer SNAP program, which provides state funds to eligible students over the summer and requires a county match. Montgomery County has historically participated in summer SNAP at a high level. We also want to maximize our participation in federal meal programs, including community eligibility provision and Maryland Meals for Achievement, but also continue to explore universal school meals. And we need to recognize that many providers have dropped out of the child and adult care food program due to administrative burdens. This program brings federal dollars in to provide meals to children who are not yet school-aged and able to participate in the National School Lunch Program. We need to build capacity in our early childhood spaces to ensure that our youngest residents are benefiting from all federal nutrition programs.
And so finally, where does this take us, and how can we act upon these opportunities for our community? We are looking first at these strategies, their ability to implement them in FY24, recognizing that that does provide us a window of 5 to 6 months of testing out strategies and exploring and evaluating the impact of these different initiatives. So the county executive is going to be sending a supplemental appropriation request to County Council that's working its way through and will be forthcoming soon. I talked with Ms. Clemens-Johnson about opportunities to make sure that that can be considered by Council in the next month in order to have funding in place for the beginning of calendar year 2024. And then how do we ensure that we can continue this work in FY25? And so obviously that will be a component of the budget consideration process, but there has been a recommendation to create an NDA for this work in order to be able to implement these strategies into the future, recognizing that this is not a one-time fix, and these are ongoing challenges as we address the greater root causes of this work over time. We're working in partnership with MCPS to explore their support needs for implementing the strategies that are focused in their space for implementation. There's ongoing, as Allison just shared, opportunities to advocate at the state and federal level for their sharing responsibility of the costs of this work, and recognizing that this is not a challenge that is unique to Montgomery County. And so partnership is needed both in policymaking and in investment. And then finally, the Food Council is launching a childhood hunger collaborative to continue coordination of community engagement in this work moving forward and provide a two-way feedback loop, both for the government to share opportunities for partnership with the community, as well as solicit feedback on how this is working to inform our ongoing efforts.
Thank you. And that was a pretty impressive coordination, amongst the presenters. We're gonna, because these are so connected, we're gonna go to the MCPS presentation, which I believe is very short, and then we'll, depending on the questions, we may ask you to play a little bit of musical chairs after that to answer from colleagues. But so I would invite our MCPS folks who are presenting up, and then if the Food Council and Resilience Office could stick around, we'll be back to you very shortly. But thank you. I saw all my colleagues writing down stuff, so we've got a lot to ask. Good morning. So, yeah, and Brian, do you need to come up? If you're welcome to, you don't have to, but. Okay, all right, good.
No pressure.
No pressure.
He's trying.
Good morning. Maybe if we just introduce yourselves, and then we can get going with the presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rachel Dubois. I'm the director in the Department of Materials Management. I support food services, our materials management warehouse, science center, and all that great operation stuff. Before that, I served as principal of Piney Branch Elementary School and Bayard Reston Elementary School, many of which you visit, and happy to support today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you again. Dana Edwards, Chief of District Operations.
Good morning, council members. My name is Elizabeth Leach. I'm the Director of Food and Nutrition Services, and I joined MCPS in June. So while I am new to the MCPS team, I'm not new to school nutrition. I've been working in this field for over a decade in the District of Columbia, first with DC Public Schools and then with the Office of the State Superintendent of Education. And I was thrilled to join the team as I live in Montgomery County and I have children here. My daughter is in 3rd grade. My son is eagerly awaiting the age to join kindergarten. So I was very happy to bring my expertise in this field home to Montgomery County.
Well, we're lucky and thankful to have you. All right, so do you want to kick us off?
Thank you. Good morning again. Thanks for having us back as always. We wanted to just come to you today to talk about our school meals program, but overall, I know the council and the interest of the county is really looking at how do we close the gap with food insecurity. And so Ms. Leach talked about she has a child getting ready to go to kindergarten. My son next year will go to kindergarten. He believes he will be the king of kindergarten, and I think that that's okay. But every morning we have this conversation about breakfast. And one of the things I narrow him into is that you have options for breakfast. There are some children who don't have options for breakfast. There are some children whose cupboards are bare, whose refrigerators are bare, and so it's a privilege for us to, one, have this conversation. And so we look at the work that we do for the children within our county as it's a privilege for us to serve the meals. It's a privilege for us to really consider and figure out how do we find those who may not have meals and look at those structural barriers to really kind of alleviate and really think about how we create different opportunities, especially coming out of the pandemic where things became topsy-turvy for people whose feet were solid on the ground. And so we appreciate the partnership that we continue to have. I appreciate Liz being here in such a great time to really rethink and redo and reapproach how we do that. So we want to talk to you today a little bit about what we do. People just think food is food. You come into the cafeteria and we have it. But in terms of the enormity of what we do as a district, as my grandmother would say, we go from soup to nuts. And so our work around just how we get the food to children is a little bit different than other districts. And then how we think about the different ways in which we partner and work together to close the gaps. So I will turn it over to Rachel, and then Liz will share some more information with you, but just wanted to appreciate the opportunity you've given us today.
Thank you, Dana. And I think just looking at this first slide, it's perfect that we're here together because the role we play, we realize, is so critical with the strategic plan to end childhood hunger. We are looking at a large operation. And so the first slide you see, we are serving around over 16 million meals a year, and that's translating to us over 90,000 meals a day. And we play around with numbers a lot. We say that's twice the size of National Stadium every single day. We said Disney World, right, sees about 85,000 people a day. It's more than that. And so when we look at that, just to frame our thinking around this, while the numbers are large, we are using that layered approach in terms of maximizing just what state and federal funding that we have. And I believe, as Essie had shared, the reimbursement structure for food is very complex. So our strategy, as you'll see kind of going into this, is really maximizing all that we can. In this 16 million meals, I mean, we've seen CEP schools that we'll talk about, MMFA schools that are providing free breakfast and lunch, through those two programs. I also went out to a high school last week, Watkins Mill High School. It's one of our CEP schools. What a difference to see every student in that high school eating free breakfast and lunch. I mean, those are difference makers in terms of those programs. So our focus today is really on those two programs and how we're maximizing. Just wanted to partner, answer any questions. And then in terms of that, how Dana said, this is an opportune time for us. We are coming away from curbside feeding every day of the pandemic, right? Waivers expired. I mean, we were on universal meals, right, during the pandemic. And so it has been very difficult coming through that and into this place. And so this time now with CEP and MMFA and figuring out how we strategically group our schools to get the most in terms of free access for students has been critical to us. And then on top of that, maybe not so much today, but we would love to come back or invite you to come back to our central production facility, which is an operating facility and helping to prepare these 90,000 meals a day. We have this time now to reset our priorities in terms of also free access. We're looking at the quality of food, the different meal options, how to engage our students and families in the choices. I have a third grader who buys lunch every day and a middle schooler who won't, just because she's the pickiest of eaters. And so engaging the kids and really talking through their experiences in their school, walking through that line. Thank you. And then Liz, are you ready to keep moving? Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
And just on that point, I've encouraged, if we can figure out to take a field trip or something to the facility. I don't know if every colleague has been there, but I'm sure many have, but it's pretty impressive.
We wanted to bring food today. I always say, let's bring food. And they're like, no, Dana, let's not. Like, let's hold on.
We'll come to you.
Okay.
But just to see what it looks like, I mean, it just in terms of how that's the start of 90,000 meals every day is important to see as we partner on so many of these initiatives through the plan. Yeah.
We are happy to have you, so we welcome you to join us. And next slide, please. Thank you. So before we dive into universal free meals and other strategies that we've been talking about, we wanted to continue to share on who we are as DFNS and our priorities. So this year we have 4 core priorities we're focusing on. As Rachel spoke about, we are engaging with students, with parents, with stakeholders to hear from them on what they want to see on their tray, in their meals, and make sure that the food and nutrition we're providing is what they want to see. So that's one of our focuses for this school year. Additionally, ensuring we have operational excellence, which requires strong staffing across our 211 schools and our production facility, will ensure that the meals that we serve across the entire district, the quality that we're seeing is equitable and consistent across our district. And then while we're building this strong foundation, we want to continue to innovate. So I think many of us are familiar now where if you go to a restaurant or you're looking to order food, you can go online and click on a menu item and see the ingredients and see the nutritional information. And that's been a challenge for school nutrition to get to that point where the rest of the food industry is. So we are currently working to onboard a brand new software where once we continue development and are at that phase, students and parents and households will be able to go onto the internet, whether it's a smartphone or tablet or however they choose, to look at our menus and engage with them. You can click, you can build meals, you will be able to see nutritional information as well as allergen information, which is very important. So that is something we are working on towards rolling out. Next slide, please. We also have our core values that ground the work that we do. Our first is to be nutritionally wholesome, so we don't just meet federal nutrition regulations, but we exceed them, and we evaluate everything that we're going to bring in and put onto the trays to make sure that they're nutritionally wholesome for our children. We are also Economic viability is a value for us. We are an enterprise fund, meaning we are self-sustaining. So most of our revenue comes from federal reimbursements, state level reimbursements, and to ensure that we can serve the 90,000 meals a day, it is incredibly critical that we maintain our economic viability. Menu diversity is our third core value. We have an extremely diverse county, and we are engaging with students to understand from them what they want to see on our menus, and there's an opportunity there to make sure that the diversity in our county is reflected in what we're serving. And then our fourth core value is our commitment to sustainability. Examples of how we are focusing on this is, as we know, during the pandemic, we were serving many curbside meals. We are trying to move away from those individually wrapped items that we had to go to for a number of reasons. And so those are some of the commitments to sustainability that are grounding our work. So here's a picture of our facility, hopefully that you'll be able to join us in. Our DFNS staff is over 800 strong. We are represented in every single school, which is unique. So while students may change teachers every year, they may see the same cafeteria staff throughout their entire time in a school. And that's a wonderful connection for our staff to have with children. We also have staff that work in our warehouse where we store a lot of our food, in our central production facility. Our central production facility is very unique in that we prepare all of the meals that we serve to elementary schools, and then those are served daily in our elementary schools. Our secondary schools have a different model in that they receive food from our warehouse and also directly from vendors, and they prepare more on site at the secondary level. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the variety of nutrition programs that we serve. So I know we've talked about that we serve breakfast, which includes the Maryland Meals for Achievement, MMFA, in classroom program. We also serve lunch. We also participate in the fresh fruit and vegetable program for those who may not be familiar with that. The intent of that program is to increase access to a diversity of fresh produce for children who may not otherwise see them. And so we try to serve produce that you wouldn't normally see in breakfast and lunch. So different variation. It also requires a nutrition education component there. We also serve after-school snack and supper in many of our schools. We continue feeding year-round. So through the summer food service program, we know food access is needed all times of the year, and we continue that. And we operate the child and adult care food program as well. All right, so thanks for your patience in grounding our work and learning a little bit about the scope of DFNS and the meals that we serve. And now we'll switch gears a little bit to dive more deeply into how we ensure access to free meals for students. So I think first and foremost, it's helpful to know that every student in MCPS has access to lunch every single day. No student will ever be denied a meal, regardless of their eligibility or their account balance. They will be served a lunch meal. And then we use a layered approach to make sure we take advantage of every access point we can for free meals to students. So I'm actually going to start with the community eligibility provision, which I love. I lovingly refer to it as CEP, so I'll use that acronym. CEP, while we live and the school nutrition programs are a very heavily regulated programs, CEP is actually one of the provisions that reduces barriers and reduces burden and allows us to serve free breakfast and lunch at schools. So we adopted that in 58 schools, which represents about 35,000 students this school year, and that is new for this school year. We also participate in the Maryland Meals for Achievement. If we could go back one slide. Sorry, I know I go back one. Go back. That's okay.
We got to see how long it is. So
you got to the end. 4 more. So CEP provides that free breakfast and lunch to students at 58 schools. That's our first layer, right? When we add on the next layer of Maryland Meals for Achievement, we are able to serve free breakfast to students at 116 sites, an increase of 27 sites this school year. So students in all of those schools have access to free breakfast. That's our second layer. Our next layers are utilizing direct certification, meaning if a student is in a household that receives SNAP or TANF or Medicaid, they automatically qualify for free meals without having to do anything, no application needed. We do data matching on the back end to ensure those students have access to free meals. The next layer on top of that is utilizing free and reduced meal applications. We work with our schools and partners to ensure that access to those applications is available. We have it online in a multitude of languages. We have it at schools in paper, and we utilize our parent community partners to make sure that households are supported in completing that application and submitting it. So if they are eligible, they maintain that eligibility. And then our last layer is our partnership with the Education Foundation through the Dine with Dignity program. And what this program does is it reduces any meal debt that a student may accrue if they participated in lunch meals with us before they became eligible for free meals. It settles their debt at the end of the year. So now I'll dive a little deeper into community eligibility provision. I know it's a hot topic because of the new rule that was released just a few weeks ago. So I talked about the benefit to students already, how it provides breakfast, free breakfast and lunch. It's also a huge benefit to households. There is no need to fill out that farm application unless there's a student at another school. And then it's a benefit to DFNS because it allows continuation of federal meal reimbursements. Now, even though it continues it, there is a difference in how the federal reimbursements we receive. And so that's what I want to dig into a little bit. Bear with me. I love CEP. It's like my baby. So we utilized it very heavily in the District of Columbia, so I'm pretty familiar with it there. The difference in reimbursement structure is that at non-CEP schools, when we serve a lunch to a student, if a student's eligible for free meals, we receive about $4.35 for that meal. For a student that is not eligible for free meals, so they're technically a paid student, we receive about 50 cents. So that's a big difference. How reimbursement works within CEP, now we can go to the next slide, please. There we go, is it's based on a formula. So it's based on the number of students that are, the identified student percentage, the number of students that are directly certified, and then it allows us to use a 1.6 multiplier. So it says you can use the percentage of students that are directly certified multiplied by 1.6. That is now your CEP claiming percentage, and that is the percentage of meals we claim at the free rate at that $4.35. Any other meals we serve, we claim at the paid rate at that 50 cents. So I did a little comparison here. So if we look at two schools, we're both serving 100,000 meals. One school has a 50% identified student percentage, and the other has a 25% identified student percentage. The difference in federal reimbursements to Montgomery County is what you see there, about $358,000 compared to $154,000. And that's a reasonable estimate right here, just based on one school. So when we analyze every year if we can participate in CEP and how we're going to participate, we're doing this analysis to ensure that we are maximizing federal funds to MCPS. And the threshold that we found this past year was that 50% ISP in all schools that were above 50% were really the best way to maximize CEP. Now, we realized when we did that, we also wanted to make sure to include schools that were important to include, so Title I schools, community schools, they were also looped in, even if they didn't quite meet that 50% threshold. So I think this is important because I know the new rule that rolled out a couple of weeks ago lowers the eligibility threshold from 50% to 25%, which increases access for schools to participate. What it doesn't do is change any reimbursement structure, and so our analysis and continuing to want to maximize funds utilizing this program maintains. Thank you for bearing with me on my deep dive there into CEP. I appreciate it. I hope it was helpful. And then we are so glad to work with the Office of Food Systems Resiliency and the Montgomery County Food Council to ensure that access to free meals is as widespread as possible in Montgomery County. And we very much support the recommendations that continuing to leverage our state and federal school nutrition programs is the strongest path forward. So continuing to leverage CEP, MMFA, direct certification. I love the recommendation to support households in applying for SNAP because that has a direct correlation to our direct certification and CEP eligibility. In addition, we're excited about the possibility of state-level universal free meals, and if that were a statewide program, that would be a really game changer for universal free meals in Montgomery County. Going beyond utilizing the state and federal programs that are out there, it would really require a deep dive into infrastructure and funding to support continued expansion into universal free meals in MCPS. And I think you already saw a snapshot that was our last slide. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. This is great, and thank you for bringing it all home to this proportion. So I'll ask a couple of questions, and then I'll turn to Chair Albornoz. But what I'll just be collegial, if depending on who it's directed to. I'll start with you since you're sitting here. So the 90,000 meals a day, that's, if I did my math, which is always dangerous as a lawyer, but 55% of students of the 162,000, is that mean, I'm assuming it doesn't, but I want to ask, does that mean every student, there's a single meal? That's what it would be if it was a single meal.
That would be if it was a single
Yeah,
meal.
but I'm assuming it's not.
Breakdown
Yeah.
shows that we serve just under 30,000 breakfast meals a day, and then about 58,000 lunch meals a day. So you could have the same student
Right.
getting breakfast and lunch. So it's not necessarily 90,000
Right.
students.
So do we track the student number? That's my question. And what's the student number? Like, how many students are accessing meals at school? The number of students?
That is a great question, and while I don't have that data point as
Okay.
of right now, we can surely follow up.
Got it. Okay. It's obviously less than 90,000, but we can, it's a knowable number, right? And I think, because, you know, one of the things I think we're all probably thinking is just to your point of the last slide, how we layer all of these things to get to universality and to get to kids that need it. The other question I had, since I have you, and then I'll ask one question of my other colleagues, then I'll pass the mic, because I'm sure we all have questions, is no student denied a meal. That is true. There has been a practice in the past, I don't know if it's still happening, of a different kind of meal. And I know that students, some that live in my house, but others, who would not, if I forgot to pay their thing, or if they get behind and, you know, dad's fault, that they are either told, you know, your account's low, which is embarrassing for students, and or they're given the other meal, which is not the same meal. Are those two things still happening? Well, I know the one is still happening, but are they supposed to be happening? And how have we transitioned and worked on that?
Yeah, I know, no, it's a great question, because this kind of all came through while we were still in the midst of the pandemic. So
Yeah.
in 2021, we did put into place our meal debt policy, so in Montgomery County, and the policy made that change in practice, that no student is denied a meal, and it's the hot meal, but sometimes, you know, we have cold sandwiches and items,
Sure.
but it is the main entree meal or the options that are there. It is no longer, you know, the peanut butter sandwich or the cheese sandwich. And we've also made a change in practice, is that the account balances per student are not discussed at the point of sale. And so that has been a huge shift in retraining our cafeteria staff and managers. The parents are still sent the balance letters, right, in terms of that policy. So in part of that policy, it also talks about us having to make attempts to collect any money owed if families can pay for the meals. We don't want you not having cash or money in your account to prevent your meal that day, but there are some families who just, like me, forgot to put money on the kid's account or send, and so it eliminates all of that piece. Another thing
So
is
just
that,
on that point.
Yeah.
So just how does the student know, other than the thing that goes home in the folder, which I know they know, but at the point of sale, is there a screen? Does the serve, when they're checking out, does it pop up on the screen that they are in a negative balance?
not for the student,
If-
for
but
the
it-
cafeteria manager.
For the
it
manager.
does.
So we just need to make sure that everyone's understanding that they are not to say anything to the student
Correct,
at point of sale, which could obviously be overheard.
correct,
And-
Is there a
absolutely.
reason for the staff to see it?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
We do also offer some à la carte items, so in addition to the reimbursable meal that we are serving, if a student wanted to purchase something in advance, if they have funds in their account, they can purchase something.
So if they try to add something that's not part of the meal, they would then be told you don't have enough money in your account to purchase that.
They wouldn't be able to purchase an a la carte item if they didn't have balance, correct?
Okay, so I think that we should revisit that also, because again, a kid's not going to, they're most like 90% of them aren't going to know what they have in their account. And I know we have our fiscal responsibility bucket, but I think there has to be a way to balancing if they grab something, an extra, whatever the thing is, to make sure that we're not having that conversation at the register. You know what I'm saying? So just, it's something I would
We'll do
suggest.
the follow-up with our staff, just in terms of implementation, as we work with our CAF staff on just all the things that we do throughout the year.
Well, that sounds like that would be a policy change. That's not, I don't know if that's necessarily implementation, because to your point, if they do grab the extra apple or whatever it is, the piece of cake, they're going to be told you don't have, and I think under current policy, they're supposed to be told you can't purchase that, right? That's what I heard. I just want to make sure.
And so I just want to, I don't know if it's a policy change. I think in the policy in terms of getting a whole meal, we have said that we would not share that. A la carte items are outside of that whole meal. And so I think what we're seeking is trying to determine how students are made aware of their account balances, but not in front of other children, so that it becomes a highlight. And so I think that's a practice that we can definitely look at.
Perfect. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on that? I think you were saying one other thing.
I was just going to say, in terms of seeing it, what it looks like in elementary and high school looks so different, and so much of that education piece, because when you watch the elementary kids go through the line and they see the a la carte, it is that education. I mean, they will put the extra and the chips and the this and the that, and it's like, it's beyond even our teachers being able to share and we do a lot around what makes components of a full meal, of what does the fruit and vegetable mean, and the milk and all of that, because that is definitely needed for the kids to understand that piece of what they're eating and how it helps fuel their bodies for the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I'll just ask one for you, Heather, and then I'll pass it. The SNAP eligibility, which is a huge thing, and you had your slides up, and if we need to pull them back up, we can. The amounts versus so the amount obviously was reduced. That's obviously an issue nationally. But our eligibility versus our who's actually signed up, how big of a delta is that for us right now?
So I brought up Allison as our
Without even asking.
expert as well, but that's a difficult number to calculate, and that actually is something that Juan on our team is working with a capstone team at Georgetown University to try to get a better understanding of the SNAP eligibility population, because those calculations, when you see them publicized, are typically based on income eligibility, which obviously is just one of the many factors that goes into that. So I think that's a number that we're still trying to define, but it is not insignificant.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add that from our experience, from an organization that does do SNAP outreach and application assistance, we've worked extensively with the schools, and we've seen that many families, you'll have the parents are not eligible for SNAP, but the children are. And those are the ones that we're really capturing with our outreach and application assistance. And we've been really successful in that. But those are ones that have the most barriers to overcome and really need that kind of one-on-one support to get over the fears that they have about enrolling in the program. We hear all kinds of things like, my kid's not going to be eligible for school meals anymore if they get SNAP, or my kid's going to have to pay it back when they're 18 if they get SNAP. So, it's just this constant work at the schools to capture that population of our students that are eligible, because they are citizenship eligible, but there may be other members of the family are not. And, we know we have a lot of mixed status families here in Montgomery County.
Thank you for that. And then last point I'll make to you, and then turn it over. Food is medicine. I was so excited to read and see about that. I think there's big opportunity with the health programs, with the Black Physicians Health Network, with the African American Health Program, Latino Health Program, to leverage, as I'm sure you are, but you could speak to that, those programs with their providers to expand that type of work. Is that something you're looking into?
Yes, absolutely. And we actually had a conversation with Dr. Rogers recently about the opportunities for partnership. And I know that the Black Physicians Network is also using the self-sufficiency standard as a better metric for determining need for food assistance and other programs. But we also work closely with the Office of Community Partnerships. And I think there's a lot of excitement around these possibilities in both county government and the community to expand the options of tools in the toolbox for supporting the overall health of residents, but absolutely building on the expertise of our providers to understand, and that's why it's crafted as a grant program rather than a sort of one-size-fits-all approach, so that they can craft it in whatever builds on the physical infrastructure of their space or the unique needs of the population that they serve.
That be a part of the special appropriation, like that's coming to us? What are the components of that? Can you speak to that now?
It is primarily focused on the recommendations that we outlined today, but with budget components that outline how it could be achieved in fiscal year '24, recognizing that that's kind of the time window that we can act on now, with also a consideration, and I know the county executive has spoken about this publicly, for a need to continue food assistance work as the need is higher than ever due to factors that we've already discussed today. But so it is primarily looking at the recommendations of the Childhood Hunger Plan alongside overall community food security continued services.
Awesome. All right, I'll stop there, put myself back in the queue. Councilman Roberts. Thank you.
Thank you. Good questions. Amazing presentations. I mean, things have been so bleak on so many different levels recently, and seeing such capable, dedicated, remarkable people working on such an important issue just warms my heart. It really does, truly. Thank you all. So let's see. Start with MCPS. Great presentation. Let's say in a perfect world, the state provides us with the resources, the federal government provides us with the resources. Do we have the infrastructure in place to be able to build out and, begin a true universal meals program system-wide?
I think we have the start to an infrastructure and a very strong foundation, and we would need additional infrastructure as well. So the facility we currently have with our warehouse, our production facility, and the kitchens in every one of our schools is really at capacity with serving the 90,000 meals a day that we do. And so we'd have to really dig into what infrastructure was needed, either storage-wise or either central storage-wise and or school kitchens, things like that. It would be we would have to build in more infrastructure.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And I do definitely want to take that tour, whoever wants to come.
Great.
That would be really cool. And then I know we provide hot meals at dinner time for our out-of-school time programs. That has also been something that has been requested. How is that going? And any data on that?
It's so funny you asked. We were reviewing our hot supper menu yesterday, and I think our supper meals are really enjoyed by after-school programs, that schools that utilize them. And so programs, what I love about our supper program is that, let's say a club is, Girls on the Run or whoever it may be is joining, they can have access to the meals for the weeks that they're there, and then we can, not serve when they take break, and they can come back and have access again. So the flexibility in our after-school snack or supper, sometimes it's cold, sometimes it's hot, for the various reasons of the differences in the after-school activities that we have, is really unique and wonderful. And so we start off slow at the start of the school year and ramp up as clubs and after-school activities get going further.
Yeah, I remember vividly, this is 100% anecdotal, but when I was at the recreation department, there was a student who had signed up for Excel Beyond the Bell for the meals. He was homeless with his family. They were living out of a car. So he was there for the enrichment activities, but what mattered most to him was that hot meal. So I think that that is something I'd love to follow up on and see how we can expand moving forward, because it is a critical component to this overall strategy, because the breakfast and lunch are so important. The summer meals that we provide are so important, but we know students are out of school much more than they are in school. And so adding capacity there. I had the opportunity to go to the ribbon cutting for the Weller Road Pantry, which was amazing. And I had the opportunity to speak to several of the families that were participating in that program. They were blown away by both the fact that it was happening at all, but also the cultural competency of the food that was being provided at that particular site. And the hours that were set up made it easy for families to be able to access. There was just a tremendous dignity that came with the entire thing. And I love our community schools model. I think that's going to be really important moving forward. If we could talk a little bit about how that's going. It's been a year now since that and other pantries have started. What are we seeing?
Hi, I'm Amy Beal, excuse me, the coordinator of the community schools. So we are continuing to expand. We have more markets, 2 opened last night and through with our partnership with Capital Area Food Bank, and we have 5 more pantries set to open this year in schools. So we are seeing huge growth in those as school is opened back up. We have preliminary numbers of around, I think, 21,000 visits to those food pantries so far this year. So we are seeing a huge increase. And as we make a more collaborative effort in that, we have now put up SNAP posters, and I know that SNAP is coming to those and having tables and things as well. So we're just continuing to grow that model. We do have where they order the food prior to having the food pantry open, and again, trying to make it culturally relevant to the families that are coming in. So we're still continuing that work.
Awesome, awesome. What's the criteria that we're using? Because there's so much demand, and every school, frankly, could use one at this point. But how are you all making the tough decision on which schools you're choosing?
Sure. So we meet as a group, excuse me, myself, the Food Council, MANA, Capital Area Food Bank, and we are looking at the farms rate, the CEP, currently all the schools, community schools, our CEP, and then we're looking at the projection for our community schools for next year, but really it's that farms rate and that Title I status that we're looking at.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I should have mentioned at the top, Ms. Bruskin gave a dynamic presentation to the Council of Governments recently regarding the food insecurity, the plan. And it was incredibly well received by our partners across the region. A lot of follow-up, a lot of interest, a lot of comments being made. Here we go, Montgomery County being a leader again. So it was pretty cool. It felt great. Not gonna lie. So, but I wanted to ask, so our faith-based institutions are one of those organizations and entities that really helped build their infrastructure during COVID, led primarily through volunteers, and many of our faith-based organizations have continued that work. And they're an important bridge because, you know, as we know, many of our constituents often turn to places they trust, and that's one of them. And we know that many of our faith-based organizations already have food pantries or some operation, depending on the scale, but many of them do. How are we incorporating them into this overall strategy, both in terms of helping make sure they're part of the ecosystem, but also channeling and leveraging that volunteer power?
Yes, I appreciate that. And I want to just note, Mr. Chair, that you were a key component of the success of that presentation. So, so thank you for your leadership in that work as well. So our faith-based providers are about 50% of our overall food assistance provider network here in the county. And I think it's important to note that we've been running the data on the funding that the county invests in the food security space, but we currently support, as a government in one way or another, over 70 food assistance provider organizations. So it is a key part of the success of these programs is that we have partners engaged in every faith practice and community around the county in this work. Some of the trends that we've seen post-COVID are that volunteer commitments are down overall. And so our faith communities in particular are very effective at continuing to leverage volunteer support. But I think it's also critically important that we not over-rely on volunteers for doing this service work. And so whether it's a house of worship or a nonprofit organization of another kind, that that they are getting, as a component of their grants or other partnerships with the county, sufficient resources for staffing and for operational practices, as well as for the food that they're distributing. So I think we also see occasionally that changes in leadership, either at nonprofit organizations, but specifically in faith communities, can also sometimes be a challenge of the food ministries being at the forefront of their work. And so making sure that we work closely with the overall leadership of each institution to continue the success of those programs. But they continue to be a key partner in this work. We work closely with Kate Chance and talk about not just how they can be our food assistance partners, but also creating access to land. The Religious Land Use Working Group has expressed interest over time in being a partner not just in the distributing food, but in the production of food and creating space to work alongside residents in growing food locally as well.
Thank you. Final question, and then I might get back in the queue later because I know other colleagues have lots of questions too. One of the things that was also very successful was how we intentionally connected philanthropy to this work. Once again, a lot of credit goes to Councilmember Jawando, who worked closely with the Community Foundation. That philanthropy has continued, and so how we obviously need to sustain and make it as easy as possible for our philanthropic folks to be able to contribute. Could you talk just a little bit about that and how we are going to be able to sustain some of those efforts? Because we're never going to be able to do everything ourselves, and so we're going to need to leverage private resources to be able to help.
I appreciate that, and just taking a moment to express thanks to Councilmember Jawando for your leadership in Food for Montgomery and that initiative. And our relationships and connections with the philanthropic community continue. And I think you can see in the recommendations that we outlined today, there are match components that we hope will help leverage private sector funds, in particular our healthcare partners in implementing food as medicine programs, that the county can be used to unlock those private dollars in a variety of ways, and also engage our private sector partners. I'd also note that the Washington Regional Area Grant Makers, they are very interested in food work and have actively reached out to county leadership to engage in conversations just like this. And our hope in creating strategic plans like the one that we're discussing today is a platform for showcasing where there's a role for everybody in this work, and create almost grant-ready programs that can then be submitted for partnership, not just with local philanthropy, but also national. You'll see very large national philanthropic organizations who are very interested in funding this work and finding communities that they can work with to pilot ideas that then they can replicate nationwide. And so our hope is that Montgomery County can be a partner with those funders as well.
Yeah, the systemic approach from all the folks in the philanthropic community I've been speaking to is what most excites them. So I think it's great. I yield back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you. I always forget because we got to reach around to get to the microphone. So, in thinking about costs and cost of living and how that impacts everyone's access to resources, and knowing that the federal poverty level gets adjusted annually, but it's not adjusted for regional differences. It's just a nationwide average. And so, as my colleague stated, it's always dangerous for lawyers to get into numbers, but I said, well, I'm going to pick a city in Mississippi that's the same size as Olney and look at what it costs to rent a one-bedroom apartment. And it was $995 in Tupelo, Mississippi, and in Olney it's $2,190 for a one-bedroom apartment, which is significant, but yet the number that we have to base the poverty level on does not get adjusted for these regional costs or inflationary costs that impact the overall financial situation. That was more a comment than that's not really a question, but I know, and Allison just met with me recently, and we were talking about SNAP, and fill in every other acronym of every program we can have. It's incredibly hard, even for people who have English as a first language and who have advanced degrees, to manage all of this. This is why we have to have staff and outreach and connection in order to get people to be able to access the benefits they're entitled to. And what, if anything, would help? And again, recognizing that the criteria are things that are established by the feds for many of these programs, which are, again, not easy to administer. But what, if anything, could we do locally to help fix that so that we're not having people fall off of one thing here, try to get on a different thing over here, and find a way to be able to connect them to the various services that they are otherwise eligible for in an easier fashion? Like, if you had a wish list, what would that be? And I see Allison getting up, so.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I definitely have a wish list, but I'll try to keep it short. I mean, you know, locally, I think, and we work really closely with the Office of Eligibility and Support Services, and they're amazing. They are understaffed. I think that, you know, so they are struggling themselves to process applications that they get in. You and I have talked about the online platform, MD Think, and the improvements that are needed there. But, you know, lots of states have looked at simplifying the application itself, using various apps, using other programs. I think that that's something that our state and our county can really advocate for, looking into an easier way for residents to apply themselves and, you know, submit the things that they need to submit. So I know California's looked into that, and I can, you know, pull together some research and send it over, because I think that any way that we can simplify that application process is going to just allow so many more people to get onto benefits. Also, you know, there's just tremendous churn, is what we call it, where someone will fall off their benefits because they didn't submit a document, or someone called them for an interview and they, you know, didn't get the call, or they were actually never called for the interview. And then they have to reapply the next month, and they have to do a completely new application all over again. There's no way to just get back on quickly. So if there's anything that could be done around that, that would be really amazing too, because that happens to a lot of our residents, and then they wind up losing a month's worth of benefits.
And those applications where they have to go back and start at square one, they're electronic, are they not?
Yeah, you can do an application in the electronic, the online platform. You can also do a paper application, drop it off at a local office. You can also email it in to the Office of Eligibility and Support Services. So there are several ways to do it. But the processing time is the same. They have 30 days to process it. So it can take, you know, when you have to do an initial application all over again after you've lost your benefits, that can take a long time to get your benefits back.
Yeah, that could be 2-3 months total span of time where you're without.
Correct.
And, you know, it just seems that in the age of technology that we live in, we should have an easier ability to make this work, as opposed to the situation we're actually dealing with day in and day out. And I know we did talk about MD Think and its many, many, many quirks. In talking through both the weekend bags and pre-packed produce boxes, and the distinction between how our elementary school students receive and sort of the falling off at middle and high school. And as I understand it, there's always a falling off in middle and high school on farms applications too, not because there's necessarily been a change in eligibility, but there's a different self-awareness that comes into play in middle and high school that definitely impacts accessing those benefits. And I know that it depends on which school you're in too, because if you're in a school where everyone is getting free lunch or free breakfast, or you're allowed to, that is gone. That stigma is gone. But if you're in a school where only 15% of the kids are eligible, and you've got open lunch, and you're one of the eligible people, so you got to go to the cafeteria, but nobody else is. They're getting in a car and they're leaving the campus. That creates a very, very unpleasant situation for those kids, because they stand out way more. What thought has been given to other ways to taking a holistic look at the schools and their needs towards mitigating those kinds of issues in schools where there's not a high percentage of students who have the need, but they are there and need to be supported in that environment?
I think it's such a critical point that you bring up, right? Even with the SNAP, to go back, because if we can get families, I mean, look at the strategic plan in SNAP and over-communicate that impacts how you eat breakfast and lunch every day in school.
Right.
And, you know, just kind of getting at that point where all of our families understand what it means, not just for those benefits, but day to day for all of your children, you know, your school-age children is so critical.
Right.
And then I think for us, I mean, these are the conversations we're having now around meals and who's eating. And so while we're maximizing all we can with programs, we are looking at just that quality of school meals. What are you looking for when you come to the cafeteria? How can we make it easier for you? We're experimenting, and we have schools with grab-and-go carts or different kiosks, different places to eat in the building.
Right.
We're working with schools around, especially in our MMFA secondary schools, around how do we support the culture that it's okay to eat in schools. So when you come in or buses are late or there was traffic, can you run to a cart and grab a bagel and cream cheese and head to class? And are our teachers making sure that we're saying, yes, it's important, you eat breakfast, come on and eat. And so that's just that shift in practice for us, but also making sure if the kids are not telling us, you know, what it is that they're looking for, they aren't going to choose if they have an open lunch, if they can jump in the car. But if we're involving, especially our culinary arts students who are sending recipes and development and looking at focus groups of just making those meals enticing for kids to say, oh, I really love those enchiladas. I had them last week and they're really good and I'm going for that. And it may not mean every day for them when they have more choices, but definitely tracking the frequency of, you know, do they enjoy what they're eating in our schools.
And I mean, even knowing like the chart that's up, and thank you for putting that slide back up, because that's a good one to have in front of us as we're having this discussion. You know, you're able to tell the number of people, you know how many are eligible, but this is the total number of meals that you serve. So you know that, you know, if you were to hypothesize that the breakfast number is largely made up of those who are eligible to receive a free breakfast, then you still have about 30,000 kids who are buying lunch, who aren't eligible, but they're participating. And that's more inclusive because they're participating, and it's not a you're eligible, you're not eligible. It's just, you know, it's available. And I'd be curious to see where you have, particularly in the middle and high schools, higher numbers of the children who are actually buying a lunch from the school, and then the percentage that are eligible, so they're just taking lunch because it's part of, you know, what they're eligible for, because that's more inclusive and would be useful to know in terms of if you make a universal free lunch, where that's really going to, like, how it's working well already, and where removing that pay burden might increase even more participation. And find out what the climate and culture is there that's making that work, because that would be useful to know how to translate that to other middle and high schools where that is not necessarily the case.
You make such an excellent point about that, because research is showing us with schools go CEP, the participation increases.
Right,
So
right.
just beyond doing that,
Right.
you would have that. And then there are states, I believe there are 8 states that have gone for universal meals. So looking at those as models and taking a look at what it meant for schools in terms of participation, because you still would have kids who may choose to bring, but the data is just trending in terms of once you have that CEP status, you're just automatically seeing an increase, which is why we'd have to go back and look at that infrastructure, because we know we would be almost exploding in terms of school-by-school participation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I know, like, if my own little statistical study of 4 kids, right? I got a picky vegetarian. I am packing lunch for the rest of her time in K-12 education, and I know that, and there's, you know, it is what it is. But, you know, my boys always buy lunch. That's just part of the routine. It's part of the thing, and it's, you know, it's part of the social aspect too. They all go to the same schools, you know. But it's, having shadowed them at their high school, it's a different environment. It's much more inclusive there than what I see even in the school climate survey data. Like, I compared ours to some of the others where there maybe was some more friction there that needs to be resolved, and find, you know, use what you know is working well to say, how do we transport that over here to make better, because it's a microcosm of the community. If you're resolving that within the school building, and the schools are a community hub, then you're helping affect and impact the community as a whole. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sales.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our food system partners from MCPS and the Food Systems Resilient Council. As the lead for eliminating disparities in public health, this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. We know how important it is to ensure our students have the most basic needs met, and this addresses it. And so when it comes to health disparities, I want us to always be thinking about, how we need to focus on proactive and preventive interventions in our community to address our most significant disparities. So I'm glad the Food as Medicine program will focus on this, but want to learn more in future updates about the social determinants of hunger to address the long-term sustainability of this expensive initiative. So my first question today is, how many people do we currently have enrolled in the SNAP benefits program? Do we know that number?
I do know that number. So in Montgomery County, we have about 65,000 residents on SNAP, and about 28,000 of those are children aged 0 to 18.
Okay, thank you. Because I'm just wondering, we're trying to advance towards this goal, and I'm just wondering how we're going to be evaluating this measure every time we come back. I know we didn't talk about specifics about how often we'll be getting, or how you'll be evaluating what success looks like to us. And so more information about that would be helpful. You mentioned the Food as Medicine program. Grants would go towards 1,000 families per week. Do we have a budget for what this grants program will look like? And I think it would be helpful to just have a cost-benefit analysis for all the programs, so we're understanding what the costs will be as we head into budget season. I know a supplemental appropriation is coming over, but we want to anticipate what future and ongoing costs would be. I'm just wondering, we have partners in place, and we fund all of those initiatives, and so I'm just wondering what the program model will be with these nonprofits that are already in place, and are they coming up with their own program, or are you co-facilitating the design of the program, and what preventative, what preventative care will they be providing in conjunction with this food pantry, Food as Medicine program?
Sure, thank you very much. And I would say that there's about 7 different strategies ultimately that are distinct, but all shaped with a couple common core components. The first is that evaluation metrics are intentionally set in advance. And so Juan, we're very excited to have his expertise on the team, will be creating a universal platform for collecting data as reported from all the different grantees across all the programs. So the metrics that will be collected will be tailored to each individual intervention, but they'll be set and communicated in advance with technical assistance and other data collection capacity support being provided to the service delivery providers, because I think it's critically important, as we've discussed, for us to understand how effective these investments are in supporting our residents, certainly from a cost efficiency perspective, but also from are we achieving the goals that we set out for ourselves and serving our residents as best as we can. For the Food as Medicine program specifically, we can look at everything from the results of the pre-screen for household food insecurity level, look at the number of families families that are receiving produce allocations from the healthcare site with a projected benefit of about $100 per month per household. Obviously, it can vary a bit depending on household size, number of children in the household, but also Catherine's been doing a lot of research. There's a Prince George's County initiative related to food as medicine that's currently being implemented. So there are models that we can lean on for pre-surveys of participants as well as post-surveys that can ask questions around eating habit impacts of fresh fruit and vegetable consumption, the impact on the number of hospital or healthcare visits that they've had during the time of the intervention, as well as biometric indicators and how this is impacting their ability to manage chronic diet-related disease. So I think there's really meaningful information that can be available there. Across all of the programs, in addition to data collection as a priority, we also are establishing flexibility as a key component. So these programs are designed, obviously, to have kind of core goals and core metrics to be collected, but we want the providers, whether it's a school or a healthcare site or a food assistance provider, to be able to shape how these programs are delivered in ways that are tailored to their unique landscape, because each school has different staffing resources or it has different infrastructure available. And so we don't want to create a standard program to give everybody a refrigerator. Some schools have refrigerators, they just need food to put in it, or they just need some additional staffing support to coordinate the distributions. And similarly, it's not a one-size-fits-all for all the different programs themselves, because some may benefit best from a family market, where others may be looking for a home delivery to the residents that are benefiting from those services. So we really want to be intentional partners in crafting these programs. That does take time, and I think that connects back to Allison's comment as well about the need for people to provide this direct support to residents, because it is very time intensive to make sure that we're maximizing the benefits. And that was one of the biggest impacts of the scale back of emergency allotments is, and I know I'm oversimplifying it, but just like our taxes, there are a lot of factors that go into determining what a household gets in benefits. And that takes time and an iterative process to make sure that they're getting the support that they are eligible to receive, and how that intersects with other benefit programs as well. So I think it's a way of saying that we will be supporting the partners in crafting these programs, but at the same time having essential core goals that we hope to achieve.
Thank you, Heather. And I'm glad you brought up the tax return benefits, because this is a similar role in the people who are going to be screening these people for eligibility. I think it would be helpful in talking about the social determinants of health to have those other coordinated services from what's going on at Montgomery College. Do they need language services? Making sure that there's a full suite of resources available to anyone who's accessing these resources. Working with our anti-poverty self-sufficiency agency, the Community Action Board, to make sure that people understand the road to self-sufficiency, and they understand the abundance of resources Montgomery County has to offer across departments to ensure their success. So that's all I have for now, and I'll get back in the queue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Mink, and then we'll do it again until we're going to, just so for planning purposes, we will stop on or before 12:30. So, just FYI. Hopefully before. Yeah.
I will not go to 12:30. Thank you to my colleagues for the great questions. And thank you to all of you for a fabulous presentation and for the work that you're doing. This conversation was one of my favorites during budget. It gets me excited about the possibilities. And we get to see our funds being used in ways that are very responsible. And there's a very tangible return that impacts our community in many other ways besides just food and mouths, right? The benefits of this touch everything. Okay, so just a couple follow-ups. The families having to recertify for SNAP every 6 months. We can't do anything about that requirement. But and I think that using the PPCs as navigators is a great idea. Wanted to better understand, without having that tool currently, what does it look like? How, what does the scramble look like to try to get families to make sure they're recertified? Do we end up losing families because of that, and then having to go back? Like, what is that looking like currently?
Sure. So the way that it works with SNAP is you apply, and then if you are approved, at the 6-month point, you have to fill out a form that's called the Benefits Review Form. This is a pretty simple form, but if you do not fill it out, you lose your benefits. So that is something that we are seeing a lot because it's a relatively new form. People are not really understanding what it is. They get it in the mail. They're not sure what it is. They don't fill it out. They lose their benefits.
Is the 6-month thing new?
No, there's always been a recertification cycle at 6 months. It used to be a full redetermination. Now it is this form. Now the redetermination comes at a year, and the redetermination is like a whole application all over again. It's the full SNAP application. So there's a lot of administrative burden on families to do this, and to do it quite frequently, to show the state like a full snapshot of their household expenses, and to have verifications for all of those expenses.
I mean, I know we're all thinking the same thing. That is just ridiculous. That's totally arbitrary to say after every other 6 months you fill out one short little form, and then you fill out just absolute. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time. So you're dealing with this in this following way. Okay.
Also, our residents experience a lot of issues with language access because, they may not get these forms in their preferred language. It may be hard for them to find an organization that can help them in their preferred language. They go, to a local office. It may be hard to find staff there that can help them in the preferred language. So we see just a lot of barriers that people face, and that's not even touching on just the fear that people face about getting into a government program and what that might mean for their family's immigration status. Even though even though SNAP is not a part of public charge, there is still so much fear that's pervasive in the community around that, and that's what we combat the most in our work is that one fear around public charge.
So who now is, without having the new program that we're hoping to implement of the navigators, who's chasing down the families to try to make sure everybody knows what they're doing, and are we seeing families then? Can you give us an idea of like the quantity of families that we're seeing fall off at that 6-month mark?
Well, so to speak to your first question, so the Food Council, our primary role is a convener, right? So we have a SNAP work group where we bring together all of the organizations in Montgomery County that do this work, along with the Office of Eligibility and Support Services, to have the most coordination of efforts as we can. So to make sure that we're trying to hit all corners of the county to do SNAP outreach. And so there's organizations like the Food Council that do this work. There are a handful that are funded by the state of Maryland in that partnership with that SNAP outreach program that the state has, where they do reimburse for half of our costs. But there are many organizations that do this work without any reimbursement from the state. And we meet frequently to talk about these barriers and how we can overcome them. We also meet with the state frequently. The new secretary at the Department of Human Services, Secretary Lopez, has been fantastic at being very engaged and aggressive about tackling barriers, particularly around the application system itself. So we are advocates. We're hopeful that we can make change in this system, and this is why the Food Council really got into this work. This is the one direct service we provide. We don't provide any other direct services, so that we could see what the experience is like for residents trying to do it, and it has been incredibly eye-opening for us.
Well, if council-side advocacy for some of those changes would be helpful, please let us know what specific asks would be useful to make, in what way, at what time. Would love to be a partner on that. That seems like a large reward for a relatively small change. And similarly, you all mentioned that we're seeing a lot of folks dropping out of the child and adult care food program due to administrative burdens. Could you say a little more about that?
Sure, I can touch on that. So one of the largest barriers for the child and adult care food program for these in-home providers who have young children in their homes is meeting the menu requirements. The nutritional and menu requirements for this program are extensive. So for example, they have to evaluate an ounce equivalent for grains. Does a piece of bread equal a 4-ounce equivalent, a 2-ounce equivalent? And that's just one example for all the different meal components. And so it's really within the CACFP program, it is very challenging for a small in-home providers to have any capacity to be able to develop menus and a proper documentation and all the requirements that are needed to be a part of the CACFP program as it is. I think that's one of the really major challenges that is being faced.
Would it make sense to, would it make sense for us to be able to do some of that measuring on the back end and then provide sample menus that meet the requirements? Like if you provide this brand of these, that type of thing?
Absolutely. That is a wonderful opportunity that can be explored and further kind of dug into. And we want to make sure that things are in place so that if the in-home provider couldn't get that, that they have the flexibility, knowledge, and to be able to continue. But absolutely, that's a wonderful suggestion and something we can continue to evolve upon with the providers.
I think there's always going to be a lot of appeal for finding ways that we can make sure we're not leaving any funding on the table and that putting a little bit of funding into better navigation or support of reaching those resources is going to have a huge payoff in terms of state and federal dollars. So,
and I think the opportunity to bring more pre-K students into MCPS is a wonderful opportunity to get more direct access to meals and kind of instead of tackling this large challenge of in-home providers understanding complex federal regulations, of bringing additional students into pre-K, into MCPS, where there are already structures in place to make meals available to them. So that's a wonderful opportunity to expand there as well.
Great. Well, let us know if you have a proposal around some of that work. That would be really interesting. The Dine with Dignity program to settle school debt at the end of the school year. That's great. That's important. It's only for farms families, correct?
The Dine with Dignity program settles debt for anyone who maybe accrued debt and then became free after that. So yes.
Okay. So do we have students or families who are facing the situation where they're maybe in that eligibility gap or whatever is going on at home, and so now you have students who are not farms, not going to be farms, they've accrued debt, what happens then?
Sure. So there are families in that circumstance that accrue debt. We do outreach along in partnership with the schools to make sure that, first and foremost, if there's a reason that they're accruing this debt, that the parent community coordinator at the school is aware so that they can support those families, because we want to make sure that those schools are aware and can support in other ways if needed. We do outreach. Again, we are an enterprise fund, so we do outreach to notify families that this debt is there and encourage them to pay. If at the end of the year we have not received, payment for those, we work within MCPS to transfer that debt out of DFNS.
Okay, great. So there's no circumstance in which the kid is going to face some. Okay, great. Thank you. Last question. First to comment, I just wanted to, we're looking at the numbers, but I just want to drive home how successful and impressive the work has been. MCPS, and in conjunction with the county and community partners, at delivering an enormous amount of food to our families and to our youth. I mean, it's incredibly complicated, and it's really been very, very flexible. When you look at the amount of bureaucracy that you have to deal with, and on the many, many layers that have to be gone through because of all the means testing at every different level and all of those things. And I think we really saw that an impressive level of agility with the pandemic programming, and suddenly now there's all of these changes, and there's all these families that we are trying to reach in all these different ways, and in so many different ways around the country, we saw things really fall apart, and you all moved very, very quickly here to make sure that kids did not go hungry and that we were leveraging those opportunities. And so as a parent on the outside, I found that incredibly impressive, and I find it very impressive now. And so I just really want to commend you all for that very impressive work. And additionally, when I think back to, when I was a student long ago in MCPS and looking at the work that you have done here, the amount of options that students has really expanded. And that's very helpful as a parent with at least one picky kid. That's really helpful. And my understanding is that salads are now available at all middle and high schools. Is that right?
Yes, our secondary menus have at least 4 options daily, one which is a plant-forward option, and so there are different salads and rotations and power bowls and things like that that folks will see throughout the menu cycle.
That's great. I will note that many parents who don't have kids yet in middle and high school, myself included, would hear that and think, no way my kid is going to pick that. But my chief of staff taught at Northwood before coming here, and he said, this is not based on data, this is just based on observation, but he said that the salads, he thinks, are the most popular option at Northwood. And Councilmember Ludick is echoing me, so I know you know.
I actually attended back to school night in Northwood, and one of the biggest feedback we got was, can you increase the number of salads we're making and offering every day, because they keep running out, which, not that I want us to run out, but I love to hear that, because what that means is, yes.
I mean, that's fabulous.
We can flex the quantity of different offerings to meet that.
Where does the salad come from? Where do the ingredients come from?
I know.
There we go. The salads are being prepared at the secondary schools. So they are utilizing fresh produce that's delivered. We have recipes for different salads that'll be rotated through the menu, and they're preparing that on site.
Are we able to source that from community partners and support like local farmers and all that?
We are continuing to explore those options, and so we're very excited. We actually are transitioning to work with a new produce vendor starting November 1st, and one of the big reasons that within the RFP process we chose the vendor that we did is because they showed us the capacity to partner with local farmers, and so that they would be able to purchase directly with their local farmers to be able to bring in more fresh local produce to our schools. So we're very excited to continue and explore that. Our new contract starts on November 1st.
That's fantastic. Would love to hear about that once that's in place and get an update. That's really, really fantastic. While the salads are extremely popular, I will note that we still, and this has been alluded to, we still get feedback from students that they wish that the core offerings, were better, were more to their tastes. And so you talked a little bit about leveraging, for example, like the culinary arts classes to get feedback or ideas. And noting that our first priority is making sure that kids have food available. And so I know that the quantity question and the distribution, that's our number one, and I understand that. That said, what can you talk a little bit more about what's being done to improve the appeal?
Absolutely. So we have a strategy where we'll be moving forward to hear directly from students. To your comment, we know that there are a number of things that students would like to see, and we really want to be able to evolve depending on what their preferences are. So we are working to put out a survey later this fall to hear directly from students in a larger capacity than we ever have before. And also keeping in mind that, again, over the past few years, for very good reason, we went to a lot of individually wrapped items, but now we have the opportunity to change direction, and while we're changing that direction, we want to make sure it's based on student input. So we will have a student survey coming out later this fall to inform that, followed by a number of taste tests within schools, so that as we're developing recipes, we're getting feedback directly from students before we're rolling them out very broadly. Because to roll out on an elementary or secondary menu, is quite large, and we want that student impact while we're developing the recipe. So if we need to tweak it along the way, we can. So that's the strategy that we'll be moving forward with, and we have a lot of items in the queue that we're doing recipe development on and continuing to taste. It'll be very exciting.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I have a middle schooler who has one of the most excitements that she's said is the salad. Like the access to salad. So, and which is I did not expect to hear as like what I like about middle school. So round two, and I'll be concise here. I want to give a shout out to the PTA, who's been very active and engaged. I'm glad to hear about the new provider. PCCs have been mentioned multiple times, parent community coordinators. I've mentioned them a lot in other contexts, in the attendance crisis that we're facing, right? And their roles in helping to leverage that. Now we're mentioning them again as far as helping with this issue of eligibility. They have a long and growing list, and there's not enough of them. And I know we might not, we have Mr. Hull in the back, but I'll just say, I want to hear, and we'll go into this more, expand what we're doing around PCCs, because I think they just serve a really important role in eligibility, obviously, but also just connecting to homes, and into what's going on in our kids' lives. And I think this is just another example of that. It also speaks to why we need universality. And, Councilmember Albernaz and I partnered a few years ago on a guaranteed basic income pilot, which is going great. And, we're a little over a year into it, and these are families that are using money that they need for things that they need without having to jump through 1,000 hoops and sign up for, programs and navigate a form. So I just think this is something that I think we need at the federal level. I'm hoping we can keep showing it at the local level. This is another area, and it just speaks to why we need universality. Look, we have almost half of our kids are on free and reduced lunch. If you go Ever Farms, it's even higher. If you go sustainability standard, it's even higher. We should be doing it, and so, and unfortunately, but fortunately for the kids in Baltimore County, they're going to beat us to it. They announced a few months ago that they're moving to universal school meals for next year. So I'll just say, from my position as the chair of the Education Committee, and I think many colleagues feel this way, we need to get there. We need to do it in the most cost-effective and smartest way. I think CEP gives us a lot of opportunity. And so on that component, and so I would say we have some options in here. You say it could cost between 12 and 65 million, which is, I think that if I'm reading that right, it's a pretty big range to go to. So could you talk a little bit about that range and what that means, and then what this with CEP means, and could we fill that gap and bring other schools to be eligible as what do we see as the way there? And this is for anyone who wants to chime in on there, because we want to go there.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to address your PCC comment.
Yeah.
So the piece that Allison spoke to is for community schools. So this is like our community school liaisons, our parent community coordinators. So the hope is, as community schools grow in MCPS, we kind of grow the work that they're doing, as we've seen them open food pantries and do some of these other things, including SNAP in that work. So while PCCs, we use the same name, but there's central office PCCs, community school PCCs.
You're talking about different ones. Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to be clear that we were talking only about community schools. I don't want to, because they're under my purview, and I don't want to speak to the other PCCs in the county that are under different departments.
But also could be a good role for, something that they probably are assisting.
Right. So as we grow our teams in community schools, like we have wellness trainers that do SNAP Ed lessons and that work on our markets and pantries as well. So really having those teams of community school staff to do some of this work. I
appreciate that.
Just wanted to address that and clarify.
No,
Thank you.
Well, thank you for this important question. We know that 8 other states have transitioned to universal free meals, and as you said, Baltimore County is utilizing CEP to offer universal free meals. And I think advocacy towards state-level universal free meals would be a wonderful avenue to be able to offer that in Montgomery County. When we look at what it would cost here without a state or a federal program to fund that, we have estimated that between 25 and 30 million would be needed for annual meal reimbursements. What that annual meal reimbursements doesn't include is any additional infrastructure we would be needed to put in place to expand the number of meals at the quality level we want to be putting in there. And so I know folks might think, well, we were able to offer free meals during the pandemic and offer them universally. What is the difference? And I think the way we want to move forward is, again, during the pandemic, for very good reason, we offered a lot of bagged, individual packaged items. And for very good reason at the time, If we are to expand universal free meals, we want to also expand the quality of those meals, the local purchasing that we talked about. And in order to do that, additional infrastructure would be needed to do it at the quality level we want to.
And we don't know what that would mean right now.
Not specifically. I think further research would have to be done to identify the cost of the
And
infrastructure.
that's, so I think we have a CIP coming up next year, or next year, yes. Not that I like adding things to the already overburdened CIP, but let's say the best thing in the world happens and the federal and state government covers the cost for the meals. Likely not going to cover the cost of the infrastructure.
Correct.
So I think, hopefully, are you all already doing the work, Seth and team and others, to figure out what that would be in preparation for
We
it?
have started and we will continue to do that work to
I think it'd be good to have that ready to go for the capital budget discussion, okay.
Yeah, and to add to that, I believe the federal response to the request for universal free meals was the change in CEP eligibility rates that dropped from 40% to 25%. So I agree with you. I'm not sure that the federal level will have another change that would support it, but there's opportunity at the state level.
Councilmember Lukey has a question on this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I'll come.
So it's just on, I know not all our schools have the same kitchen setup, right? So we have a lot of variety in what could or couldn't be done on site based on existing facilities. So I think that it's important to note when you're doing this, so that we have that for the CIP, what might be needed in order to standardize them to allow the type of flexibility you need in providing the meals you're talking about, because there have been restrictions over time, not just based on the sheer volume and size of our school system, but also on the facilities. So some of the buildings are older than others, and it's a definitely not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Very good point. Go ahead, yes.
And if I could just weigh in from the perspective of the
Please.
strategic plan, because I think that the piece of having the infrastructure in place to support scaling is critically important. So I don't want to lose the thread on that. But the plan specifically looks at two different approaches to expanding meals access. One either being supporting the families that fall within that self-sufficiency gap, and that's probably close to 40,000 children that are not eligible for free and reduced rate meals, but fall below that 400% of the federal poverty level, or stepping in to support the schools that are not currently receiving universal meals, but have a larger percentage of those low to moderate income families. So I think those are two totally different approaches, but I think it is worth considering, that there's not one universal way to approach universal meals. And then I guess the other thing that I would note is that our retail access recommendation related to the childhood hunger plan is putting dollars in the pockets of families, and one of the two approaches is specifically for those families falling within that self-sufficiency gap, to allow them to purchase their groceries, to give them additional dollars for shopping, which would hopefully directly support their ability to provide meals for their families. So I think it's also not, it's important to not only look at school-based meals as the ways to support those families for feeding their children at all meals during the day.
That's a great point, and I think we're going to have to obviously have a pathway to this, and so you've discussed some potentials. I had one other question, and I'll turn to any other colleagues. Councilmember Alvarez first. The issue of identifying need of students who need to be getting access to meals, and young people. It was mentioned in the packet that that MCPS staff may need training to help recognize food insecurity, right, and to facilitate those referrals, right. And when I had my first round of questions, I talked about like a potential impediment to that, like to the fear of getting up there and not having the money, right, which I know does paralyze, some kids. How are we? What's going on currently with training for all school staff to recognize that, and on the MCPS side, and do you see that as, an issue, and how are you addressing it? And just if you could speak to that, whoever's appropriate to speak to that.
Sure. I think one of the critical components is we have our counselors within our schools, and as we start off every school year, we talk about who our kids are, really recognizing and understanding that everyone comes in with different needs, but we also don't want our biases to come in and be able to cloud what's happening. At each of the school levels, we have our individual school teams that really work around individual classes of students, the teachers knowing the kids, our counselors. We mentioned our PCCs. We talked about different types of PCCs within our schools. And then we also have our social workers that have been working with our schools as well. So we have layers of personnel who have built relationships with families, one, so it doesn't become a spotlight necessarily on the child, and engaging with the child directly and asking them questions that either one, they may not know, or two, it makes them uncomfortable, but really the inroads in terms of really understanding and working with the families. I think the second component also goes down to making sure our kids have their dignity. And so we had that conversation just in terms of how they go through the school lunch line, what's being said and what's not being said. But we also have to be observant as staff. And so at the beginning of the year, we launched just a different way to start to engage with our communities, back to school night. That was a way in terms of really trying to understand and build those personal relationships so that if something was off, it created that opportunity to engage. So we don't want to put the children in the middle, if that makes any sense. But we know that we have to have that opportunity to connect with our families. We do not do holistic training that says this is what food well, that's okay.
I appreciate that.
We don't do holistic training to say this is what food insecurity looks like. It is not something that we train across the board, but we do talk about how we engage with children. Things that we can look at that say that there may be a void in a child's life, whether it's food, whether it's a physical insecurity, or other cases that are there.
So my question to, I guess, our community partners, is resilience, is there a best practice, you can come back to me if you're not aware now, of a module? I don't think it would be a whole training. It would just be something you would incorporate into educators, anyone who's interacting with, it's kind of like in the Be Well 365 model of like anyone who's interacting with kids, like I would imagine there's a module for noticing, food insecurity and maybe moving it forward. So I don't know, Heather.
Yeah, I'll let Allison speak to the Food Council's extensive initiatives to provide trainings to people in the broader community, but I would just hold out the school-based health centers, and especially with those being expanded, as a really important tool in our toolbox. We're working with partners at the HHS too, and we had actually been working on that pre-COVID of implementing Screen and Intervene in those settings, both to get a better understanding of the levels of food insecurity that are occurring, and then also referring families to the supports that are available if necessary. So I think there's a variety of different partners on site at schools to help with that.
And I'll just speak to the training that we've done with Amy's team at community schools. So we work with all the community school staff to get them educated on the different resources that are available for their families. So to understand where food assistance resources are around their schools, how to access them, and to be able to have conversations with their families around SNAP and how to do like a WIC referral, just so that they have those basic skills so that they know how to talk to their families about their food assistance needs, and then where they can refer them if they need assistance.
Appreciate it. Go ahead.
I'll add on to that. So we do training with all of our community school staff on food insecurity. We have Allison's team. We have a number of other folks come in to talk about the resources they provide. We do a needs assessment where we survey families and talk to families one-on-one about food insecurity as well, because we align them to all kind of the benefits that are offered to them. So we have the Food Council, we have Allison's team, we have faith-based partners, we have different community school staff that are on different committees throughout the county for a number of reasons. So we're constantly having those conversations and how to identify that need.
So in all the community schools, you do train staff on this, so if something exists, there might be a way. Obviously, every school is and should be a community school, if it's not defined. We're working our way and expanding, so maybe there can be some because obviously there's kids at every school that need it. So, all right, thank you very much. Councilmember Alvarez.
Just one final point. A lot of aha moments throughout the entire presentation, but one of the bigger ones was the food delivery which is such a huge issue. I mean, because the access and the transportation barriers are so stark. And we know there are food deserts in Montgomery County. And so I strongly encourage us to uplift that part of this overall strategy, but also leverage it potentially with our promotores and some of our other, because let's take advantage of that engagement to maybe be able to provide some other connections to Councilmember Sales's point, which gets to the heart of, trying to get families out of this cycle to begin with. But that in particular, I think, has some very significant opportunities, and I'm excited about that. So thank you.
Councilmember Sales.
Thank you. And just following up on Councilmember Albornoz's point about the retail food access expansion. I know that additional resources, as far as, vouchers will be provided. You mentioned that this mobile unit will be provided during February and June. Just wondering why that particular time. I'm just thinking about the winter months being, probably the most challenging for families with transportation challenges to navigate. Have we started thinking about who will provide the delivery service and what food retailers we're exploring yet?
Yes. So regarding the retail pilot, obviously we haven't been able to sort out or reach an agreement. We need to, obviously formalize the funding in place first. But there are a number of models that build on platforms from the private sector that can model the way SNAP works in retail-based settings. So those can be with individual retailers, so grocery stores, or they can be with delivery services. So it can make sure that purchases are aligned with the requirements of existing nutrition assistance programs, but also really get to those, to Councilmember Albornoz's point, the transportation and the time barriers that are what we hear most regularly from residents in terms of their barriers to food access. When the recent survey results that came up from the Capital Area Food Bank show that that food insecure families are employed at higher rates than food secure families, and I think it just speaks to how underemployment in particular really drains on the time for these families. So to where we can make food access more available to them to come to their home or aligned with their availability is critically important. So it is designed to be on a monthly basis, so it wouldn't be a point in time, but rather just takes time to reach agreements to set up new programs. So I think the goal would be February to June with a monthly benefit of about $100 per month per household.
Okay. And just speaking about technology, I know that we talked about dining in dignity and not using the point of sale to talk about expenses, but you mentioned this system that you're coming up with to customize meals, and parents can go in, it'll be interactive. As a college student, we all had our ID cards, and they had a barcode, and if you were on the meals program, you could, go to the bookstore, you could get your meals. Is there something similar that we can do to ensure that, if those kids do want that a la carte item and they scan and they're unable to get it, or it accrues on their card up to a certain amount because funds are so limited? I'm just wondering if we're thinking about that as a component to this new technology.
So currently in schools, students either use a card that they have a scanner, they can scan right through their line. So they are utilizing that currently, or they have a student ID number that they put in on a pin pad. A lot of the secondary students are very fast, and, they come right through the line. So that technology is in place and will continue as we evolve into the new software and the new capabilities it will give us. And we will circle back and go back to our teams to reconsider how we currently handle a la carte and what communication strategies and software we can utilize to enhance the interaction at the point of sale while maintaining the processes we need to have in place.
And I know that there's discussion about a visit to our food headquarters, and how are we integrating culturally appropriate meals across the school system?
It's a great question. We are so excited to get input directly from students. That's really what we want to hear. Anecdotally, we hear so many stories of we want vegetarian, we want vegan, we want Mediterranean, we want this and that. So what we want to do is get larger data directly from students to ensure that as we are developing recipes, that we're going to reach what we really know is the broad desire to be put on menus. And that includes culturally diverse menu items. It also includes menu items that will be sensitive to certain dietary allergens or preferences. So looking at all of that when we're developing things. So for example, when we're developing something, can we, even though it doesn't have to be, can we make a menu item gluten-free just so that it's available to more folks, even if it doesn't have to be? And that way we can develop menu items that are meeting more needs. So the input that we'll be getting from students will directly impact the recipe development, where students will then have the opportunity to taste it, give us feedback before those items are then put onto the menu.
Good. I just remember during some of those food distributions during the pandemic, how helpful and appreciative those families felt when they saw their cuisine at some of these food distributions. So I appreciate that. All right, I yield. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, now that we're all sufficiently hungry, all jokes aside, we really appreciate the work. As Councilmember Alvarez said, this is exciting. It is a real bright spot, and excited about the work that's happening and the work that will happen. And we look forward to doing our part to help it continue and welcome. And you clearly know what you're talking about, so we're glad that you're here. And we will, maybe to staff here, this is something. Obviously, we'll check in on budget, but it'd be nice to do something after budget too, another deep, to see how things are going, and before we head into the CIP to hear about that, to kind of, we need to narrow in on our strategy and on our plan to get to universality and to end childhood hunger. And this is obviously, the school piece is a huge component of it. It's not the only component, but it's a big component. So thank you for everything that you're doing, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Let's go eat.
Yeah. Have to walk the dog.